Another little blurb here from this book, which I think is awesome. It says, the leader who fails to face her darkness or his darkness must live with fear and hypocrisy. The result will be a defensiveness that places saving face and controlling others as higher goods than blessing others and doing good work. Here's the thing that I've been coming to understand. We have to get away from this perfectionistic view of Christianity, where if I'm not perfect, then I'm no good. I just nothing. That is a lie. You will never be perfect. And those perfectionist tendencies need to be crucified and say, God, I'm a mess, but bless this mess and use me. God, I am willing, I'll go. We have to be, you might even be saying today, I'm not as on fire as I should be. God will use you. I remember when I was growing up in youth group, and the kids are jumping around and they're dancing and they're raising their hands. Man, I was just so clammed up, so closed up. Maybe that's you. God wants to break you free. But it's all in taking a step, It's all in taking a step in obedience to see how God can use you and not believing the lie the devil tells us that we're a failure because you fall short. He keeps reminding us of all those things. When God is saying, you have all of the kingdom of heaven, all the power of supernatural life inside of you ready to be unleashed. If you'll just bring your little loaves and fishes. Let me multiply them. That's all you got to do. Just bring those loaves and fishes. And stop disqualifying ourselves, living in condemnation and all that stuff. This guy here, his name's Rob Schellert. Rob Schellert is, when I was a youth pastor in a Foursquare church in Northwest New Jersey, when I met Rob, he had no hair. He was all shaved, and he kind of hunched over, and his eyes kind of bugged out, and he kind of looked like Uncle Fester, remember from the Addams Family? Yeah, kind of like that. Kind of had that vibe going. He always wore all black, okay, and he was, very quiet, never talked. He had 2 hearing aids. He's mostly completely deaf. Even with the hearing aids, he only hears half of what I say. And that's who Rob was. He was an introverted, very quiet, shy guy. He was in college, but not doing well, doing really bad grade-wise. He was working at Staples, and his life just wasn't going anywhere. And I was preaching one Sunday, and he came up to me afterwards, and he said, Pastor Juan, could I serve? Could I help out in the youth group? And I was like, awesome, man, that would be great. I need help. And so he began to come and serve week after week. He would come and do anything that needed to be done. He'd blow leaves in the parking lot. He'd help me set up the room. Anything that he'd run errands. He never said, oh, no, I can't do that. That's beneath me. He did anything. He was a man that was just, his heart was burning. He had to get in the mix. He had to get in the fire. He had to follow God. Was he the most stupendous, young Republican American, like, hey, that's the born leader, everybody put in the yearbook? No, he's the opposite of that. But he was a man after God's own heart. Well, Rob ended up, I asked him to give his testimony and share for one of the youth group meetings. And he was terrified, and he was afraid. And he said, Juan, if I tell them about the real me, nobody's going to like me. Because Rob had been a person who had been depressed and suicidal. Just, been the kind of person that he felt nobody would want to be around. Well, he gave that message because I twisted his arm enough, and he did incredible. I mean, every eye in that room, every ear was just watching and listening, and God was moving. And it turned out that drew all those kids to him, and he began to be a leader. They began to look to him. Well, we took him on a trip to Uganda, Africa. We took a group of like 20 people to do a mission trip with Foursquare. And here's Rob, how he usually looked with no hair. And as you can see, he had a blast. God used him, and it was just the best. It was the best. If you haven't been on a mission trip, you better go. It's just, you're missing out. But on the way there, we stopped in London, England, because we had a layover. And it was a long layover, like half a day, so we thought, well, who wants to sit in the airport? Let's go walk around London, see the sights. So we're all like zombies, you don't sleep, and you feel like it's the middle of the night. And we're walking around, And my wife, Tracy, she prophetically said to Rob while we're walking on the street, God, Rob, wouldn't it be wild if God called you to these underground subcultures, these punk rockers and heavy metal heads and all the things you're into here in London? Wouldn't that be wild, like a missionary? And he said, oh, yeah, well, that never happened, I mean, I like New York and New Jersey, and that's where I think I'm supposed to be. But he came back from this mission trip, and he was he just kept getting fired up. Things kept happening, and God's using him to speak to, Africans halfway around the world. And so he comes back, and he enlisted in a discipleship training school up in Canada. He began to go, and he just fill up on God, and they began to train him and disciple him even more. And he went on mission trips from that team to like the Middle East and China, and so he had these wild experiences. And he came back, and he started a Bible study in his home, and all these kids kept coming. They played video games with him for hours, and then they worship on their face, and they just press into God and study the Bible. And God was raising Rob up. Well, here's Rob today. He's married. This is his bride. He just got married recently. Rob is now a full-time urban missionary pastor in London, England. He started a church. He was part of a church. He was pastoring a church called the Glorious Undead, which was taking a quote from a C.S. Lewis book, I think. And God was using him to reach out to these subcultures. He would go to these heavy metal clubs and punk rock clubs where people were Satanists and witchcraft. I mean, the darkest, dark places. And Rob would go in there alone. And he would sit at the bar with them and just start to talk. And they'd start to, become friends. He'd say, hey, why don't you come to my house? And they would have Bible studies at his house. They'd play video games. They'd eat and they'd hang out. And he began to disciple them and build the church, the most least likely people. And now he's pastoring this church. He's planted a brand new word called the Bridge Collective. And he's gathering artists and musicians and all this, young people. In fact, I'll let you see some of them. Here's some of the church people right here in his church. This is on the beach in London. It's a bunch of small rocks, really. And this is for a beach baptism that they did. You have to have a lot of guts to be baptized in the ocean there because it's cold. I've done a baptism in Ireland, and it was brutal. The waves are crashing in, and here he is baptizing. They baptized multiple people in the ocean there in London. So God called him from who he was to impact really Europe. He's run festivals. He ran this festival called Destruction Fest, which drew in these underground churches and these punk rockers from Germany and France and England all together, and to hundreds of people to teach people how God is destroying these barriers between God and man, how he's tearing down these walls between Christians and non-Christians, because all would come to the conference to hear this great music and these great Christian bands, and then he'd do workshops and he'd teach. And they'd see God. And I'll tell you the truth. Rob's not the most dynamic speaker in the world. He's got a little bit of a speech impediment because of his deafness. But when he speaks, people listen. Because no one is more genuine and more real. He oozes Jesus. They see God in him. Weak, foolish, afraid. Yeah, all the above. If God could use Rob, couldn't he use you? If he could use me, couldn't he use you? Here's how he puts it. Brothers, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Maybe you don't have a PhD. Hey, guess what? Me neither. Not many were influential. Maybe the most popular. Not many were of noble birth. Your last name wasn't Trump or Bush or, something like that. But God chose you, the foolish things of the world, to shame the wise. He chose me. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. He chose the lowly things of this world, and the despised things even, and the things that are not, to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. This is an encouraging word, guys. He's putting his hand upon you, and he's saying, I am choosing you now to fulfill my destiny, my dream that I have had for you since when I created you, before you even born. The things I destined for you to do. Even the weaknesses you have are gifts, according to God. Well, you might be a person that, loves to have people over. You may be an extrovert, loves to have lots of friends and chat and whatever. Maybe God's calling you to do stuff that, have people in your home. You have the gift of hospitality and to have fun and have people over. And like a friend of mine who started a house church, only they don't call it a house church because then the people didn't like to come whenever they said the word church, so they just do everything they would do. They just say, oh, let's come hang out at my house. And God just is touching so many people, and that he brings from work and from his neighborhood, and they're just touching his lives because they're being their best friends. They're everybody's best friend. Maybe that's you. Or maybe you're the other kind of person. You're kind of like me. It doesn't really like to have people over, let's be honest. Maybe you're kind of more introverted, more shy or whatever. You have to find, there's something inside of you that you love. What is it you love to do? Maybe it's play sports. Maybe it's watch sports. Maybe it's cooking. Maybe it's mechanics or building or playing video games, watching movies, using computers. Guess what? God can use all that stuff in the kingdom of God. Because as big a nerd as you are into that stuff, there's somebody out there who's just as big a nerd. God's been using me I'm hoping to open up my Frisbee golf ministry. I just started getting, like a fanatic into Frisbee golf, which most of you don't even know it exists. That's how nerdy it is. It's like golf when you throw Frisbees to get least amount of throws into this basket thing. Look it up on the internet. But I'm starting to meet people, non-Christian people, and that's what they love to do. And I was like, man, I love to do this too. Will you play with me? It's like I'm an adult. What am you play with me? Let's go play, because this is what I love to do. But what a great open door of relationship, because I'm not going to be the person that goes up to 20 people and like, hey, let's do a bunch of stuff. I'm one-on-one, That's me. Maybe that's you. However you are, God will use who you are. He's made you that way. It's okay. That's not a down thing. However he's created you, he'll use you. If you're into playing music or playing the radio, whatever it is that you do it for him. And if you'll just make it your goal today, say, God, would you use me? I thought I was disqualified, but you are calling me. You have qualified me. You're working in me. God, would you reveal to me who, where, when, how? And as we engage in that process, faith is a journey. Did you know that? It's not like you pray the prayer and you got it. Boom, that's it. No, it's this incredible journey and adventure. And it's not a guilt trip. And it's a shame if we live in it, faith, like it's a guilt trip. I'm not good enough. Yes, you are. God in you is good enough. You can accomplish anything with God on your side, just like Rob. Take you from Staples to London, England